My son and his wife tried to put me in a nursing home. So I took back the house I meant for them and exposed the truth. Subscribe for more true tales of silence turned power. Don't forget to like if this story moved you. They say silence can be comforting, but that kind of silence doesn't exist after 50 years of marriage. When Frank died, the silence he left behind wasn't peaceful. It was a kind of emptiness that echoed in every drawer, every chair, every coffee mug that no longer had its pair. For months, Agnes Holloway wandered the halls of their farmhouse outside Spokane, like a ghost clinging to a life that no longer existed. She tried. She woke up each morning and made 2 cups of coffee, forgetting and remembering all at once. She still fixed his side of the bed, still folded his flannel shirts, and placed them where he used to leave his wallet. But the house had grown too big, not in size, in weight, in the heaviness of memory. Her hands began to tremble more. The stairs creaked louder, the nights colder. And that's when Ethan called. Her only son, her pride, her reason for planting daffodils each spring. "Mom," he said over the phone, "why don't you come stay with us a while? We've got plenty of room now that Chloe's office moved out." Her heart fluttered. It had been years since he'd sounded that soft. Agnes didn't hesitate. She packed her life into 3 suitcases, wrapped the wooden photo of her wedding day in a towel, and took the Greyhound bus toward the city, toward what she believed would be healing family and warmth. The house Ethan and Chloe lived in was nothing like the farmhouse. Sleek, open floor, all whites and chrome with voices that echoed off the marble. Chloe greeted her at the door with a warm smile and a hug that felt slightly too staged, like a polite church greeting. "We're so glad you're here," she said, stepping aside. "Let me take those bags. Ethan's just finishing a Zoom call." Agnes stepped inside and took a slow breath. It smelled like lavender and surface cleaner. No trace of cinnamon rolls or fireplace ash, nothing that felt like home. Still, she smiled. "It's beautiful," she whispered. And it was. Just not for her. The guest room was tight but neat. Chloe had laid out fresh towels, a tiny succulent on the nightstand, and a handwritten note. "Welcome, Agnes. We're happy to have you here." She placed her bags in the corner and touched the note like it might dissolve. Maybe she was just nervous. Maybe city life would take getting used to. She tried to stay out of their way the first few days. Cooked breakfast eggs and toast, the way Ethan used to love, only to find Chloe had ordered green smoothies. "Oh, I don't really eat carbs anymore," Chloe said with a chuckle. "But thanks, Agnes. That's so sweet." Ethan didn't even glance at the plate before rushing off to work. "Sorry, Mom. I've got to prep for a pitch." "You're okay here, right?" She nodded. Of course. She didn't want to be a bother. She began cleaning, not out of duty, but out of instinct. She folded their laundry, vacuumed behind the couch, wiped down the fridge. Chloe noticed. "You really don't have to do that, Agnes. We have a cleaner that comes Thursdays." She said it with a smile, but something shifted in her tone, a shade colder than before. Later that evening, Chloe mentioned during dinner, "Just so we're all on the same page, we kind of have this rhythm here, you know. Like Ethan has his schedule and I work from home, so I just want to make sure everyone gets their own space and peace." Agnes nodded again, but that night in the quiet of her room, her heart sank. Their rhythm, their space. Where did she fit into that? The days blurred. Chloe would offer tea, but only when others were watching. She took photos of Agnes cooking and posted them with captions like, "So blessed to have this angel mother-in-law in the kitchen today." Then she'd scrape Agnes's food into the trash once the photo was taken. Ethan, as always, was too busy. "She's trying, Mom," he'd say. "Just give her time. It's not easy having someone move in." Agnes wanted to say, "Not easy for who?" But she swallowed it. again, until the silence wasn't just from Frank's absence. It was inside her now, a quiet voice growing louder by the day. "You're not welcome here." Not really. But she stayed. Because this was her son. Because hope is stubborn. Because sometimes, even when you're being erased, you still believe there's something left to hold on to. At first, Agnes thought she was just adjusting. After all, new rhythms take time. She told herself that again and again, folding Chloe's silk blouses with care, making chamomile tea for herself in the quiet of early mornings when no one else was up. She placed flowers on the kitchen counter, marigolds fresh from the corner market, and waited for someone to notice. No one did. They withered in silence, like her. One morning, Agnes found a list on the fridge meal prep for the week. Chloe's handwriting color-coded. Monday smoothies and chia bowls. Tuesday tofu stir-fry. Wednesday intermittent fasting day water only. The words sat sharp in her chest. There was no mention of Agnes, not even a note about something simple for her. That night, Chloe served dinner for two. Ethan and her. Agnes came down to an empty table. "Oh," Chloe said lightly, "I thought you were resting. We didn't want to wake you." On the counter sat a plate dry toast and a half-cut banana. Cold. The next day, the thermostat was lower, much lower. Agnes wrapped herself in an old shawl and asked Chloe carefully if the heating was all right. Chloe gave a small, amused laugh. "Oh, I'm just trying to be energy conscious. You know, climate change and all." Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Agnes smiled back, then went upstairs. She sat by the window, cupping a mug of warm water like it was coffee. She missed warmth, the kind that didn't need explanation. Ethan worked longer hours. Or maybe he stayed away longer. Each night he'd come home with tired eyes and quick kisses for Chloe, barely glancing at Agnes. And when he did, it was always the same. "You okay, Mom?" Short, half guilty. She'd nod. "I'm okay." But she wasn't. One Sunday, Chloe brought a scented candle into the living room. "This is lavender and cedarwood," she said, placing it on the side table. "It's for relaxation, just trying to keep the house feeling light." Then turning to Agnes, she added, "Some of your perfumes are a bit strong. I hope you don't mind if we keep scents more neutral." Agnes blinked. "Of course," she said softly, though she hadn't worn perfume in weeks. Later that week, Agnes overheard a conversation through the vent in her bedroom. Chloe's voice low but firm. "She's not a bad person, Ethan. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying she needs more support than we can give her. This can't be forever. We need boundaries." The word hit her like a door closing. Boundaries. She didn't cry. Not then. But her hands shook a little more as she folded the towels the next morning. She stayed longer in her room. She spoke less. Her world shrank to the size of a guest bedroom with a view of a back alley and the sound of a ticking wall clock that never seemed to stop. Then came the mail. A small envelope addressed to Ms. A. Holloway. Inside, a glossy flyer for Silver Pines Assisted Living, and a sticky note, just something to think about. Love, C. She read it 3 times, folded it, unfolded it, folded it again, and placed it quietly inside her Bible. She didn't mention it. Didn't want to sound dramatic. She wasn't dramatic. She was a mother, a wife, a woman who once ran a school board, who helped her husband build their first barn with her bare hands. Now she was a shadow that everyone stepped around politely. Like old furniture you don't want to throw away but don't want to use either. One afternoon, she tried baking. An old apple pie recipe, the one Ethan loved as a child. The smell filled the house warm and familiar. When Ethan came in, he smiled faintly. "Wow, haven't smelled that in years." Chloe appeared seconds later. "Oh no," she said, waving her hands. "Sugar and butter. Ethan, you know what that does to your digestion. She opened the windows. Sorry, Agnes, but we're really trying to keep the house low-cal and low-tox. The pie was never touched. That night, Agnes sat in the dark kitchen, a single slice in front of her untouched. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It pressed against her chest. It was no longer what was unsaid. It was what was being rewritten. Her role, her place, her voice. She wasn't Agnes Holloway, mother and matriarch. She was now the extra presence in the guest room, the one who needed to be supported elsewhere. And slowly, almost too slowly to notice, the house she had moved into for love began to feel like a waiting room. And she had no appointment. There was a kind of ache that Agnes couldn't place. Not in her bones, she'd weathered enough winters to know arthritis when it came knocking. No, this was deeper. In the stomach, in the chest, in the part of the soul that only starts to bleed when you realize you've become invisible. It was a Wednesday morning when she noticed her toothbrush was missing, not misplaced, gone. She found a new one in the drawer, bright blue, unopened. Chloe must have replaced it. Yours looked a bit worn, she said over breakfast without looking up from her smoothie. Agnes wanted to ask why she hadn't just asked it, but she knew the answer. You don't ask permission from a guest. You make decisions. She tried calling a friend from back home, Eileen, her neighbor of 20 years, but the call went unanswered, twice. And on the third ring, it went straight to voicemail. Agnes stared at the screen for a long time. Even her old life had started to forget her. That evening, as she sat folding laundry alone in her room, a framed photo of her and Frank fell off the dresser. The glass didn't shatter, but the frame cracked at the corner. She stared at it for a long moment, then placed it face down. Friday came with sunshine and silence. Ethan had left early. Chloe worked from her laptop in the dining room, earbuds in. Agnes moved around quietly, cleaning the bathroom. As she reached for the mirror cabinet to put away a bottle of Tylenol, she saw it, a label that hadn't been there before. A post-it note. Pills must be stored safely, not for public access. C. Public. As if she were a liability now. A threat to the sterile order of the home. That night, Agnes cooked dinner. Not out of hope, but out of muscle memory. Baked salmon, roasted carrots, mashed potatoes. The kind of meal that spoke of Sundays and family. Ethan was late. Chloe came downstairs, sniffed the air, and sighed. Oh, Agnes, I really wish you'd let me know. Ethan's doing keto again. She didn't touch the food. Ethan arrived around 9. Sorry, I ate with clients, he said. He kissed his wife's head and walked past the dining table without a glance. Agnes sat down, ate alone. Later in her room, she opened her old journal. The pages were yellowed soft at the edges. She wrote 3 lines. I feel small here. I miss being someone's home. I wonder if Frank sees this. Then she closed it, tucked it under her pillow, and turned off the light. But the darkness had a company. It wasn't a fear, not yet. It was a knowing, a sense that something somewhere was shifting, that she was not just unwanted, she was being managed. The small decisions were no longer hers. What to eat, what to wear, when to speak. She tried to make a phone call again, this time to her former pastor. The line rang and then disconnected. The Wi-Fi, she realized, had been changed. The new password wasn't written down anywhere. The next morning, Chloe said cheerily, "We're switching to a new provider. It's faster. You don't really need it, though." "Do you?" Agnes smiled, but something inside her curled inward. You don't really need it. Like her needs were optional. Like her presence was a courtesy. Like her existence was something to be gently erased. One evening, Agnes watched the two of them through the crack in the kitchen door, Ethan laughing as Chloe showed him something on her phone. Her hand on his shoulder. his forehead against hers. They looked like a couple in love, young, free. And in that moment, Agnes realized she wasn't a part of their life. She was a relic, something Ethan loved once but didn't know where to put anymore. Chloe, though. Chloe had never loved her. She hadn't even tried. She went upstairs that night and packed a small bag, just in case. She didn't know what just in case meant, but she knew she had to be ready. She stared at the suitcase for a long time, then opened her Bible again. The flyer from Silver Pines was still there. She unfolded it slowly. On the back, in her own handwriting, she had scribbled one line weeks ago. "Is this what love turns into?" The house creaked. The night deepened. And somewhere deep in her chest, a small voice long ignored finally whispered back, "No, but this isn't love anymore." It started with the keys. Agnes noticed they were missing one morning when she reached into her coat pocket. The familiar jingle wasn't there. Her set of house keys, which Chloe had given her the first week, was simply gone. She searched calmly at first in her bag, in the kitchen drawer, even in the laundry basket. Nothing. When she asked, Chloe looked up from her tablet with a measured calm. "Oh, I took them, just for safety," she said, sipping her green tea. "We've had a few deliveries go missing lately, and I think it's better if I keep all access centralized." Centralized? Agnes nodded, but something in her chest pinched. She was no longer just a guest. She was now someone who needed to be managed. That same week, the guest room got a new lock. "It's for your privacy," Chloe said sweetly. "This way the cleaner won't accidentally go in and move your things." But Agnes never remembered seeing a cleaner. Not once. The only person who entered her room besides her was Chloe. Quiet, careful, always when Agnes wasn't there. Then came the medicine. Agnes had kept her prescriptions in a small basket near her nightstand, just like she always had. But one morning, half of them were missing. The labels were still there, tucked behind the bottles, but the pills were gone. She asked Chloe calmly if she had moved them. Chloe furrowed her brow. "Oh dear, I reorganized everything in the cabinet upstairs." "I didn't think you still used those." "Some of them seemed expired." Agnes froze. Those weren't optional. They were for her blood pressure, for her heart. She didn't say anything. But that night she lay awake in the dark, her heart tapping like a bird against glass. Ethan noticed none of it. Or perhaps he didn't want to notice. He had grown thinner, pale under his eyes, always glued to a screen or a Bluetooth headset. When Agnes tried to talk to him, it was always the same "Mom, not now. Chloe's helping me with client onboarding. She's been amazing." Agnes wanted to scream, "Amazing," but she didn't. She simply nodded. Again. Sunday came with the promise of peace. Agnes baked banana bread just the way Ethan loved it as a boy. She left it on the counter with a note. "For you," just like old times. But when she came back an hour later, the bread was gone. In its place was a note. "Too many carbs. Please don't leave things out. We're trying to stay mindful of food triggers." See. Agnes walked to the trash, found the loaf wrapped in plastic untouched beneath a pile of kale trimmings. Her voice was vanishing, not because she wasn't speaking, but because no one was listening. And Chloe was everywhere. She set the calendar, controlled the grocery list, decided when the heat came on. She had even moved the family photos. Agnes's wedding photo with Frank, which once sat in the living room, was now tucked into a box in the hall closet. When she brought it up, Chloe just smiled. It didn't match the new aesthetic. You understand, right? But the worst part wasn't the control. It was the gaslighting. The subtle ways Chloe made her feel crazy. One night, Agnes swore she'd left her reading glasses on the nightstand. In the morning, they were on the toilet tank. Another evening, the kettle she'd used vanished, replaced with a note that read, "Electric kettles are safer for seniors." Agnes didn't recall ever spilling anything. She began to question herself. Did she move the glasses? Did she leave the oven on last week? Did she forget a word during dinner? And then came the cameras. She found the first one in the corner of the hallway. A small black dome half the size of her fist. She hadn't noticed it before. But once she did, she saw another near the kitchen, another near the back door. When she asked Ethan, he shrugged. "It's just for security, Mom. Everyone has smart homes now," Chloe added. "And it helps us keep things smooth. Like, if you ever fall or need help, we'll know right away." Agnes stared at her. For the first time, she saw it, the edge beneath the softness, the steel beneath the smile. She was being watched, judged, recorded, and worst of all, reshaped into someone who was forgetful, inconvenient, unsafe. The narrative had already begun. She could feel it. Chloe was crafting it like a social media post, a woman too old to manage, too fragile to function, a burden wrapped in vintage sweaters and lavender perfume. That night, Agnes sat by the window and stared out at the city lights. She thought of Frank, of the way he used to call her Ag with that tired, loving sigh. Of the mornings they sat in silence, knowing that silence could be shared, not feared. She missed being someone's person, not someone's project. In her journal, she wrote, "It's not just that I'm disappearing. It's that someone else is telling the story while I'm still here." It was the doctor's appointment that finally made her hands shake. Not because of illness, but because she didn't make it. She hadn't canceled it, hadn't forgotten it. But when she arrived at the clinic on a quiet Tuesday morning, the receptionist blinked and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your son called yesterday, said you wouldn't be coming." Agnes stood there, her purse clutched tightly. "My son?" she asked. "He doesn't schedule my appointments." The receptionist looked again at the computer, unsure. "It says here patient has been relocated to an assisted facility. Records pending." Her voice lowered. "Are you not at Silver Pines?" Agnes left the clinic with her heart pounding. On the walk home, her thoughts spun like an old ceiling fan, each blade sharper than the last. She hadn't spoken to Ethan about moving anywhere, and she certainly hadn't agreed to anything. That night, she asked him directly, "Did you cancel my appointment?" Ethan, lounging in sweatpants with his laptop, didn't even pause. "Chloe said you were thinking of rescheduling. She was going to handle it." He looked up finally. "Is something wrong?" "Mom." Agnes wanted to scream. "Yes, something is very wrong. I am still here. I am still alive. I still get to choose." But she didn't. She just nodded. Again. The next week, a woman showed up at the door. Friendly smile, clipboard in hand. "Hi, I'm from Golden Leaf Senior Support. Just doing a follow-up on the interest form we received. I'd love to talk about some gentle transitions we can assist with." Agnes blinked. "Excuse me?" The woman looked surprised. "Didn't Chloe or Ethan mention it?" She checked her notes. "Says here you're looking into long-term placement before the end of the year. We have a few open suites." Agnes shut the door, locked it, then stood behind it, her chest hollow. Her life, her decisions were being ghost-written by someone else. Later that day, Chloe knocked gently on her door. "Hey," she said with that honeyed tone that always made Agnes feel like a child. "You seemed a little thrown earlier. I didn't mean to catch you off guard. I've just been researching options. Just in case. You know how forgetful things can get when life is busy." She stepped into the room uninvited, sat on the edge of the bed. This isn't a bad thing. It's about support. Giving you what you need even when you're too proud to ask. That word again. Support. Always twisted into a rope that strangled freedom. Days later, Agnes opened the mail to find an insurance form with Ethan's name listed as authorized medical proxy. It was signed by her. Or at least it looked like her handwriting, but she had no memory of signing it. She stared at it for a long time, her throat dry. Chloe walked by, glanced over her shoulder, and said casually, "Oh, that. Yeah, we did that during flu season. Just in case something ever happens. You remember, don't you?" Agnes said nothing, but that night she took out her journal and wrote, "I am not crazy. I would remember. I would." She started keeping her important papers in a zipped pouch beneath her bed. Insurance cards, banking info, her original will. She no longer trusted the desk drawer, no longer trusted Chloe's habit of just tidying up. And when Ethan said, "Relax, Mom, we've got everything handled," she smiled back, but inside something sharpened. Something woke up. On the third Sunday of the month, Chloe threw a small dinner party. "Just a few friends from her wellness group," she said. "You'll love them. They're all about conscious living and elder empowerment." Agnes was not invited to eat with them. She was welcome to join later for dessert, Chloe said, "if you're not too tired." From her room, Agnes heard them talk, voices light and cheerful with just enough edge to cut. "She's still here," one woman whispered. Chloe laughed. "For now, but we're working on it. Ethan's on board finally. It just takes time." Agnes stared at the ceiling. Her ears buzzed. She clutched the frame of her bed. For the first time, she didn't feel sad. She felt betrayed. Not just by Chloe, but by Ethan, her son, her boy who used to crawl into her lap after school with a scraped knee and ask for just one more story, Mom. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who let someone else write his mother's ending. Later that night, Agnes stood in front of the bathroom mirror. She looked older, yes, but not weak, not senile, not helpless. "I see you," she whispered to her reflection, "and I know who you are. Don't let them erase you." It was in the laundry room of all places that Agnes found her final piece of clarity. She'd gone down to switch the clothes over a task she'd claimed back from Chloe after several accidental shrinkings of her cardigans. As she reached into the dryer, a sheet of paper fluttered out from between two towels. It wasn't hers, folded still crisp. She opened it slowly, eyes scanning lines she wasn't meant to read. It was a facility transfer form, an official one pre-filled. Her name, her birth date, a box already checked early-stage memory decline, reported by caregiver. At the bottom, next to Ethan's name, was a blank space for signature. She didn't remember breathing for several seconds. The room spun gently like the floor had become a conveyor belt she wasn't ready to step on. This was real. Not paranoia, not imagination. A plan. A roadmap to somewhere she never agreed to go. Upstairs, Ethan was laughing at something on the TV. Chloe's voice trailed into the hallway with the scent of herbal tea and scented candles. The perfect couple, living their curated life. She walked slowly past the kitchen back to her room, closed the door, locked it. Then she sat down, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't cry. She didn't shake. She opened her drawer, pulled out her journal, and carefully tore out a blank page. On it, she began listing everything: dates, events, missing items. Odd conversations, the name of the woman from the senior center. The doctor's visit, the proxy signature. It wasn't panic anymore. It was documentation. She wrote like someone building a case. Because she was. The next morning, Chloe knocked on her door with a smoothie. "Made your favorite," she said sweetly. Agnes didn't take it. Just smiled and said, "I think I'll make some black coffee today." Chloe's smile tightened just a little. Oh, okay. Just let me know if you feel confused again. I'm happy to help. Confused. The word lingered like a spark ready to ignite. That evening, Agnes sat in the armchair by the window, a blanket across her lap, and the flyer from Silver Pines once again in her hands. She stared at it long and hard. Then she flipped it over. On the back, in firm handwriting, she wrote, "I am not confused. I am aware. I am watching. And I am not done yet." At dinner, Chloe presented a new dish quinoa and grilled chicken with something green that smelled like dish soap. Ethan barely looked up from his phone. "Mom, you'll try this right. It's what Chloe prepped for your new dietary plan." Agnes looked up slowly. "Actually, I'd like to speak to both of you. Tomorrow. Together." Her voice was calm, measured, but it sliced the air like a blade. Ethan blinked. "Is something wrong?" Agnes smiled. "Let's just say, I've been doing some thinking." That night, she pulled an old box from the back of her closet. Inside were things Ethan hadn't seen in years. Her retirement paperwork, Frank's discharge certificate from the military documents of property inherited from her uncle who'd passed without a will. Most of it had collected dust. But there, in a sealed envelope, was something even Chloe couldn't erase: the deed to a small plot of land upstate. Unremarkable on the outside. But tucked inside that property, still under her name, was a forgotten investment and the original copy of her will. She made a plan. Not revenge. Not yet. Just a correction. A redrawing of the story. One page at a time. And as the moonlight poured across the window, Agnes didn't sleep with dread. She slept with clarity. The kind that comes not when you're rescued, but when you rescue yourself. It started with a calendar invite. Agnes found the note slipped under her bedroom door, written in Chloe's rounded, curated handwriting, family discussion. Sunday, 3 p.m. Living room. Please be on time. It felt more like a summons than a request. She placed the note on the nightstand and stared at it for a long while. Family discussion. The words clanged in her chest like distant church bells. She knew what it meant. She'd felt it brewing in the way Chloe had been quietly rearranging her schedule, reorganizing rooms, whispering on the phone when she passed. Ethan, for his part, had grown quieter, less eye contact. Always tired, always working on something. That Sunday afternoon, the living room was meticulously arranged, as if for a presentation, not a conversation. Agnes noticed there were only 3 chairs. Hers was set slightly apart from the couch, which Chloe and Ethan occupied like a panel of judges. Next to the TV, a 4th guest stood with a soft smile and a leather-bound notebook. "Hi, Agnes," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Natalie. I work with Golden Leaf Senior Solutions. Chloe mentioned you've been considering some gentle transitions." Agnes didn't sit. "I haven't mentioned anything," she said, voice steady. "And I've never met you." Natalie's smile faltered for just a second, then reset. "Oh, perhaps there was a miscommunication. I was told today's meeting was about exploring your long-term care options." Ethan stood palms out like he was soothing a startled animal. "Mom, please. Just hear us out, okay? No one's forcing anything." Agnes slowly sat down. She kept her purse in her lap, not for comfort, but for grounding, like an anchor. Chloe began with her usual honeyed tone. "We've just noticed how exhausted you've been lately, how forgetful. And with the stairs, the cooking, we thought maybe it's time to talk about what comes next." Agnes said nothing. Chloe reached into a folder and pulled out a printed document 2 pages thick. "We've even found a beautiful facility not far. It has garden walks, art therapy, full-time staff. It's really lovely, Agnes. You'd have your own space." Ethan handed her a pen. "It's just a letter of intent," he said. "Not legally binding, but it helps start the process. Think of it like a safety net. Agnes didn't touch it. Instead, she asked quietly, "Who decided this was necessary?" Chloe smiled as if she'd rehearsed the answer. "We're all deciding together. As a family. That's what love does." But Agnes knew better. There was no together here. There was a plan, and she was the only one not consulted. "I'm not signing anything today," she said, folding the papers once deliberately. "Thank you for coming," she added to Natalie, who stood awkwardly glancing between them. Chloe's face didn't change, not outwardly, but her eyes narrowed just slightly. "Of course. We're not rushing. Just don't take too long." That night, Agnes heard Chloe on the phone in the hallway, whispering, "I thought we had her. She's slipping, Ethan. You saw how she forgot the appointment last month." "No, the papers are still unsigned, but she's close. We'll try again." Agnes didn't forget. She just pretended to. And when Ethan left a second folder on the dining table 2 days later labeled, "Support Authorization for Elder Living Transition," she opened it alone with trembling hands. The language was buried in legalese, but she found it a clause transferring oversight of her assets to a shared account under Ethan and Chloe's names. Her hands turned cold. This wasn't support. It was surrender. And they wanted her signature. She placed the document back in the folder and carried it to her room. Then, in the quiet hours of night, she pulled out an old flashlight and opened the closet in the spare bedroom, the one that used to be Frank's office. She hadn't entered that room in months, not since he passed. It still smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. On the top shelf behind the military memorabilia, she found it, the safe. Combination untouched. And inside, well, that was for later. The next morning, Chloe was humming. It was the same tune she always hummed when something was going her way. Bright, upbeat, too sweet for the early hour. Agnes sat at the breakfast counter stirring her coffee slowly, watching Chloe slice oranges like a woman who had never once known doubt. Her nails were freshly painted. She wore lipstick, even though she claimed to be working from home. "You'll be happy to know," Chloe chirped. "We've made some progress on your care options." Agnes looked up from her cup. "I didn't ask for any." Chloe paused. Her smile didn't drop, but her eyes did. "I just meant, Ethan talked to the bank. We might be able to get a small loan to help with the transition. It's complicated with all the paperwork, but we're working on it." Agnes nodded slowly. "A loan." Chloe nodded back too quickly. "Well, technically, it's a home equity line, nothing big. But with your name still on the deed, we needed to arrange a few things. I mean, you're not using the property in Spokane anymore, right?" Agnes felt the shift, the gentle push beneath the words. "You're mortgaging the house," she said flatly. Chloe blinked, then laughed too loud. No, not yet. Just talking, exploring options." But Agnes had seen this performance before in church fundraisers and HOA meetings in every overconfident realtor who thought charm could mask intent. She excused herself, walked calmly to her room, and opened Frank's old safe again. Inside, among the tidy stacks of paperwork, was a red folder, one she hadn't touched in years. It held the full deed, a copy of the property inheritance, and a trust clause that no one in that house seemed to remember existed. She took it out gently. Later that afternoon, Chloe was back on the phone. This time in the backyard, pacing between the patio chairs. "She hasn't signed yet, but it's just a matter of time. Once we get the bank paperwork through, the equity can cover both the transition and the kitchen remodel." Agnes stood just inside the screen door, silent. She hadn't planned to listen, but now she knew. That night, a glossy invitation was slipped into her mail slot, handwritten by Chloe, decorated with pink and gold flowers. "Farewell gathering for Mom. Agnes, a celebration of her new chapter." It was scheduled for the coming Saturday. Agnes noticed two things. First, it wasn't addressed to any of the neighbors she'd met over the years. Not the kind retired librarian across the street who once brought her pie. Not the family with 2 boys who mowed their lawn every Sunday. No, this invite was Chloe's crowd. Young, successful, upwardly mobile. People who wouldn't question a missing mother-in-law. Second, it was not optional. At dinner that night, Ethan brought it up like a child presenting a school project. We thought it'd be nice. Something light. Just to show how much we love you before the big move. Agnes stared at her son, seeing him clearly for the first time. He wasn't evil, but he was lost. Tethered to a woman who saw people like assets and emotions like leverage. And he had let her lead. Time and again. She nodded once, just once. That evening, she returned to Frank's old room. The safe opened with a familiar click, and this time she took everything. The original property deed signed and notarized under her maiden name. The trust clause protecting the house from sale without her consent. A flash drive holding audio clips of Chloe's recent phone calls. Frank had installed the phone recording system during his time as a military tech. She'd never disabled it. And one final thing, a small velvet pouch with the original bank stamp from their estate's first mortgage, closing a relic, yes, but one she knew could reopen doors at the local credit union if needed. She packed it all in a slim envelope, sealed it, and placed it beneath her pillow. Then she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the corner of the room where the wallpaper peeled slightly. The house had begun to rot, not in structure, but in soul. And for the first time in a long time, Agnes no longer felt sad. She felt ready. Saturday came with too much sun for a farewell. Chloe had decorated the living room with pastel balloons and one of those letter banners that read "New Beginnings" in gold script. A table was set with cupcakes, mocktails, and a custom-printed sign. Cheers to Agnes for all she's done and all she'll enjoy. It was insulting. A parody of appreciation. There were no neighbors, no old friends. Just Chloe's circle real estate agents, yoga instructors, tech bros with 2 white teeth, and women who called themselves intuitive lifestyle coaches. Agnes was told to stay upstairs until everyone arrives. Chloe had even laid out an outfit on her bed, a beige cardigan and pearl earrings. Polished, soft, erased. But Agnes didn't wear it. Instead, she sat at her desk quiet. The envelope in her lap felt heavier than it should, as if it carried not just documents but the weight of everything unsaid. Downstairs, laughter echoed. Music played a curated playlist that Agnes had never liked. Through the vent, she heard Chloe's voice rising in performative emotion. "We're just so grateful to have had her here. And we want her next chapter to be peaceful, right?" Some clapping, a cheer. Agnes stood up. She walked slowly to Frank's old room one last time. She turned the dial on the safe and checked once more, not because she doubted, but because she needed to feel that solid click. Then, without a word, she slipped the envelope into her travel bag, zipped it shut, and picked up her coat. She moved like smoke through the hallway, past the guest bath, paused for a second in front of Ethan's office door, the one he now kept closed, and then she descended the stairs. No one noticed. They were too busy smiling for Chloe's phone. Someone was live streaming. A girl held a ring light like a trophy. Agnes reached the front door. Chloe finally caught sight of her from the kitchen and called out, "Wait, Mom, don't you want to say a few words?" Agnes turned. She took one long look at the crowd. The strangers, the decorations. Her son smiling nervously from the far side of the room, uncertain whether to walk toward her or stay still. He stayed still. Agnes gave the faintest of smiles. Not bitter, not sweet, just final. "No," she said. Then she opened the door and stepped outside. The air hit her like a baptism, sharp, honest, unscented. She walked to the curb where a cab was already waiting, its engine humming like a whisper of escape. The driver stepped out to help, but she waved him off and placed her single suitcase in the trunk herself. Then from her purse, she pulled out one last item, an envelope marked with the official seal of the First National Trust Bank. She held it for a moment, then tucked it deep into her coat pocket, close to her ribs, like armor. As the car pulled away, she didn't look back. Inside the house, Chloe was already weaving a new story to her friends. She gets overwhelmed, you know. It's part of aging. Ethan said nothing. He just stared at the open door. The banner swayed gently in the air. The cupcakes went untouched. And in a quiet corner of the living room beside a vase of lilies, the folder Chloe had accidentally left out still sat unguarded. It was empty, because Agnes had taken the only version that mattered. She wasn't being sent away. She was leaving on her own terms. And with everything they tried to take, she was taking it back. She rented a one-bedroom apartment in West Seattle under the name Evelyn Hart. The building was old but clean. A pale brick complex with creaky staircases and a small courtyard where dandelions grew wild, unwelcome, but persistent just like her. Agnes had paid 6 months' rent in cash, no questions asked. The landlord, a single dad named Tom, never pressed. He just handed her the keys, told her the garbage went out on Mondays, and never asked what a 73-year-old woman with 2 large suitcases and a fireproof envelope was running from. She didn't decorate. She didn't unpack anything that wasn't necessary. On the second night, Agnes opened Frank's old safe again, the one she had carried with her in the trunk of the taxi. She placed it gently on the laminate kitchen table. The plastic was scratched. The latch was stiff, but the contents were intact. Inside, the deed, the bank documents, Chloe's voice, and a business card, Anderson Law Group, Elder Justice Division. She picked up the phone. 2 days later, she met with Elizabeth Tran, an attorney who specialized in elder financial abuse. Mid-40s, sharp-eyed and quiet. Elizabeth didn't waste time on sympathy. She read every document with the precision of a surgeon. Then she set the file down, looked Agnes dead in the eye and said, "You have a case." That was the beginning. They ordered copies of the title transfer attempt Chloe had filed. They cross-referenced banking records and loan pre-approvals Agnes hadn't known existed. One account registered under E&C Monroe Living Trust showed a pending line of credit against the house filed just a week before the farewell party. "I never created a trust," Agnes said. Elizabeth tapped her pen once. "They did, fraudulently. And they used your original signature from a healthcare proxy form to mock up the file. It wasn't just betrayal. It was criminal. It took 3 weeks to trace Chloe's digital footprint. With the help of a paralegal, Agnes discovered that this wasn't Chloe's first time walking close to the edge. There was a buried civil suit from 5 years ago in Spokane. A woman named Dolores Hart, age 82, had accused Chloe of convincing her to donate part of her estate in exchange for false companionship. The case never made it to court. It was settled quietly. The same year, Ethan and Chloe got engaged. "Guess who represented her?" Elizabeth said, sliding the printout across the table. Agnes didn't need to guess. Ethan. He had been a law clerk, at the time not yet barred to practice but deeply involved. His name was on every internal memo. Agnes closed her eyes. The betrayal ran deeper than convenience. It had a pattern, a method, a playbook. She could have broken then, could have cursed the world, blamed God, closed herself into bitterness. But she didn't. Instead, she opened her laptop and wrote one email. To Rachel Wexler, investigative journalist, Seattle Weekly. Subject: What would you say to a story about a mother, a stolen house, and a birthday that ended everything? Rachel responded in 6 minutes. Rachel Wexler arrived at Agnes's apartment on a Thursday afternoon. She wore all black, carried a battered leather satchel, and smelled faintly of printer ink and jasmine tea. Her eyes were quick, not judgmental, just observant. She scanned the space, the table, the untouched couch, the single chair at the kitchen counter. "This it?" she asked. Agnes nodded and placed the manila envelope on the table between them. "This is where the story starts," Rachel read. For 45 minutes, she didn't speak. She highlighted key names, made margin notes, occasionally lifted her eyes to Agnes's face, as if to compare the tone of paper with the woman behind it. When she reached the audio file transcripts, particularly the one where Chloe said, "The old woman won't last much longer. The house is already ours. She just hasn't died yet." Rachel's pen froze. "I'll need to verify all of this independently," she said. Agnes nodded. "Do it." And Rachel did. Over the next 10 days, she dug deeper than Agnes ever could. She found inconsistencies in Chloe's job history, traced her real estate license to a revoked registration in Idaho, found social media accounts under pseudonyms Chloe used to engage in influencer coaching, where she advised women to secure their futures by targeting vulnerable men or aging family members with property. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Tran was building the legal flank. She had subpoenaed the bank's internal communication logs, uncovering that Chloe had already attempted to sell the house to a private buyer for cash, despite not having the legal right. The documents had been drafted. The buyer had even made a deposit. They were days away from closing, Elizabeth said. "You left just in time." The irony wasn't lost on Agnes. The farewell party had not been a sweet send-off. It had been an eviction dress rehearsal with cake. But now it was Agnes writing the final scene. Together, the three women, Agnes, Rachel, and Elizabeth, met in a quiet booth at a restaurant tucked into the edge of Capitol Hill. Over decaf coffee and peppermint tea, they laid out the final plan. A birthday party. Agnes's 77th. She would ask to host it at the Monroe House. She would forgive Chloe and Ethan, say she wanted one last memory in the home she loved. Chloe, hungry for image and status, would agree immediately, especially if Agnes hinted she had rewritten her will, especially if she promised Chloe a big guest list including potential donors from the community, Ethan's old colleagues, even a few retired judges. She won't be able to resist the optics, Rachel said. She lives for it. And once they're all there, Agnes asked. Elizabeth leaned in. "We showed them everything, but not as accusations, not as rage, just as fact." Agnes smiled, not with cruelty, but with calm. She would not scream. She would not beg. She would show them the truth in the quietest, most devastating way. It would be the most silent victory of her life. The invitation read simply, "You are cordially invited to a private 77th birthday celebration honoring Agnes Monroe. An afternoon of gratitude, reflection, and legacy. Location 218 Willow Grove Lane, Seattle. WA. Date March 15th, 3:00 p.m. Chloe received hers first, delivered by hand in a pale cream envelope with a wax seal that looked expensive. She called Agnes immediately. "Oh my God, this is beautiful," she gushed, her voice syrupy through the phone. "Are you sure about this? I thought you were mad at us." Agnes took a beat before answering. "I was," she said calmly, "but I'm tired of holding grudges. I want peace before I go." Chloe bought it in an instant. She was already making a guest list by the end of the call. "We'll do it classy garden seating string quartet, high tea style. Something Instagram-worthy but still elegant." Agnes agreed on one condition: she wanted to personally invite a few of her old friends from the neighborhood, many of whom Chloe had never met. Chloe hesitated, but the chance to show off their family healing narrative to her circle proved too seductive. Meanwhile, Agnes began her own list. She started with Rachel Wexler, who RSVP'd yes within 15 minutes and asked if she should bring a photographer. Agnes said yes. "Make it discreet," she added. "Nothing flashy, just honest." Elizabeth Tran, who would attend in plain clothes but carry a briefcase with certified legal documents, the deed, and the audio evidence on a secure USB drive. Frank's old colleague, Jerome Lee, who worked with Veterans Affairs and still had pull at the local media station. He'd always admired Agnes and Frank's quiet generosity. A representative from the Washington Coalition for Elder Rights. A tall, sharp-witted woman named Letitia Daniels, who had dealt with several similar cases but never one quite this calculated. Agnes sent one more invite. To the First National Trust Bank manager, who had flagged unusual activity on her file back in January. The same man who had quietly slipped her the call logs without alerting the Monroes. "I owe you a piece of cake," she wrote. He replied, "I'll be there, and I'll bring the flagged loan application, just in case." By the end of the week, her side of the room was full. Agnes didn't buy a new dress. She wore one of Frank's old cufflink pins on her blouse instead, a small token barely visible but solid as steel. As the date approached, Chloe sent updates, thinking pink tulips and maybe a rose tower. Should I get a banner that says, "Best Mom Ever"? Or is that too much? Can we do a photo wall? Like vintage shots of you and Ethan, nostalgic but cute. Agnes responded with brief approval and requested only one thing. "Please don't put me in the center of attention. I'd rather sit near the back and watch." Chloe laughed. "That's so you." Ethan didn't reach out. Not once. He left the party planning to Chloe. Left the guest coordination to her. Left everything to her. And in doing so, left himself out of what was coming. The Monroe house looked exactly as Agnes remembered, and nothing like it all at once. The rose bushes in front had been trimmed into sharp geometric shapes. The front porch stained a different color. The windows gleamed with new glass. But beneath all that surface polish, the bones of the house were still hers. Frank had built the front walkway by hand. Agnes herself had planted the Japanese maple in the back, now towering half forgotten. It was March 15th, her 77th birthday. The guests arrived promptly at 3:00 p.m. Chloe stood at the door like the queen of a castle she thought she owned, wearing a pastel pink dress that flared too wide and a smile that stretched too tight. She greeted people with a practiced tilt of the head and phrases like, "We're just so honored to host Agnes one last time. She's finally forgiven us." Inside the house was dripping in overcompensation. String lights, gold table runners, oversized frame photos of Ethan and Chloe with Agnes awkwardly photoshopped in. A tribute video playing on a loop in the living room, all slideshows and soft music. It was hollow, curated, artificial. And yet, no one could deny how perfect it looked. Chloe beamed at the compliments. Then Agnes arrived. She stepped out of the black car slowly, her cane in one hand, her other hand resting on the arm of Elizabeth Tron, dressed in an unassuming navy dress suit. Behind them walked Rachel Wexler, notepad in hand, a small mic clip discreetly inside her blouse. The others came too, Letitia from Elder Rights, Mr. Grant from the bank, Jerome from Veterans Affairs. Chloe didn't recognize half the people. She squinted, adjusted her smile, and greeted Agnes with an air kiss. "You look amazing," she purred. "Just amazing. You ready for a magical evening?" Agnes nodded. "Let's make it unforgettable." The house grew louder as people filtered into the dining area. Wine glasses clinked. Someone played a piano in the corner. Agnes was led to a seat by the fireplace, not the back corner like she'd asked. The center. Chloe wanted her on display. Agnes said nothing. At 3:45 p.m., Chloe tapped her fork against a glass. "May I have your attention, everyone?" The room hushed. She launched into a sugary speech about family forgiveness legacy. She praised Agnes for her strength, her wisdom, her generosity. Her voice even cracked at the right moments. The guests clapped. Then Agnes rose. She didn't speak loudly, didn't gesture. She simply placed her hand on the back of her chair and said, "Thank you for coming. I have a few things to share as well." Chloe froze. Elizabeth opened her briefcase and handed Agnes a folder. Agnes didn't unfold it. She turned to the crowd. "Many of you know me as Ethan's mother. Fewer of you know I built this home with my husband brick by brick. What you don't know is what happened after he passed." Then she opened the folder. Slide by slide, she handed each document to Rachel, who projected them quietly onto the wall behind Agnes, using a small wireless projector. The fake trust papers with Agnes's forged signature. The bank's flagged mortgage attempt. The pending property sale to an unlisted cash buyer. the transcript of the audio Chloe didn't know had been recorded. And then Rachel cued the final piece, a video. The volume was soft but clear. Chloe's voice played. She's 76, Ethan. She can't climb stairs. She won't be around for long. That house is ours already. She just hasn't dropped yet. Silence. Someone gasped. Ethan stood pale, motionless in the back. Chloe's wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the hardwood floor. The room was still echoing with Chloe's voice from the recording, cold, calculating, chilling in its ease. She just hasn't dropped yet. The guests were frozen mid-sip, mid-bite, mid-smile. You could feel the room shift, the weight of silent judgment pressing in from all directions. Someone coughed awkwardly. Another muttered under their breath, "Jesus Christ." Chloe stood stunned, her painted smile splintering. That's not what it sounds like," she stammered. "That clip's been edited. This is all out of context. She's lying. She hates me." Agnes didn't reply. She didn't have to. Elizabeth Tran stepped forward, calm, impeccable. "For legal clarity, I can confirm that this recording was obtained lawfully and that Mrs. Monroe is the sole legal owner of this house. The mortgage attempt, the attempted property transfer, and the falsified consent forms all happened without her knowledge or signature, and all under your direction." She turned to the crowd. "We've submitted a complaint to the Washington Office of Adult Protective Services. A civil case is pending." Chloe spun around. Ethan, say something. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding. She's manipulating you." But Ethan didn't move. He looked like a man who had just walked into his own nightmare. His hands hung at his sides. His mouth opened, but no words came. Chloe's voice was shrill now, desperate. You knew she was sick and old and didn't need all this. We were just securing our future." Letitia from the Coalition for Elder Rights spoke up then, gently but firmly. "You were exploiting a grieving widow with declining mobility and emotional vulnerability. That's not securing your future. That's financial abuse." A low ripple moved through the room. Whispers. Eyes darting. Friends of Chloe's shifting away, avoiding her gaze. One of them, her closest bridesmaid friend, quietly set down her champagne and left the room. Then Mr. Grant from the bank cleared his throat. "The loan you attempted to acquire under false pretenses. We're formally retracting our relationship with you. And that report is going to the State Fraud Department." Chloe's face blanched. "You can't do this. This is all her fault. She turned everyone against me." Rachel Wexler finally spoke, stepping into the light. "No, Chloe. You did this. Agnes didn't need to destroy you. She just told the truth and let everyone else watch you fall." Chloe's voice cracked. "You're all ruining my life." A quiet, bitter laugh came from someone in the back. It was Jerome. "She tried to ruin Agnes's first," he said. "Now she's just living to see justice." That broke something in Chloe. She stormed toward Agnes. "You vindictive old..." But Ethan stepped between them. "Don't," he said. Just that one word. And it hit harder than a shout. His face was ashen, jaw tight. For the first time in years, he looked like Frank. And Chloe, finally seeing that, took a step back. The birthday music had stopped long ago. The party decorations suddenly looked absurd, pink tulips and rose towers now drooping under the weight of what had just happened. Agnes turned to Elizabeth. "I think that's enough." Elizabeth nodded, packed the documents calmly, and handed a final envelope to Ethan. Inside was a single unsigned check, the final installment from Frank's old investment account. Meant for Ethan. Meant for a future that never happened. She looked her son in the eye. "I won't ask you to choose," she said, "because the truth already did that for you." The party ended in silence. Not the kind of quiet that comes from contentment, but the stunned, aching stillness that follows after a building crumbles. Guests began slipping out the back one by one, avoiding Chloe's eyes, whispering into their phones. The air was thick with shame, and it didn't belong to Agnes. Chloe sat on the edge of the staircase, heels off, mascara streaking. Her hands trembled as she tried to open her phone, but notifications flooded faster than she could tap. Messages from coworkers, influencers she'd collaborated with, PR agents, friends who were now distancing themselves. One message read, "You're trending, not in a good way." Another, "Just got off a call with one of your sponsors. They pulled the plug." And the worst one, "You know, there's a video, right?" Because yes, Rachel had already uploaded the full footage to Seattle Weekly's platform. It was titled simply "The House That Spoke: A Mother's Quiet Revenge." Within 45 minutes, it had 200,000 views. Meanwhile, Agnes stood quietly by the fireplace. Her shoulders didn't sag. Her face was calm, not smug. This wasn't a victory lap, it was a closing statement. Ethan approached her slowly, still holding the envelope she had given him. He looked like a man walking out of fog, seeing clearly for the first time. His voice cracked when he spoke. "I didn't know it was this bad." Agnes met his eyes. "Yes, you did," she said softly. "You just didn't want to admit it." He nodded once. It was all he could do. Then Agnes turned to leave. She didn't look back at Chloe, who now knelt on the floor beside the kitchen island, sobbing silently into her hands. Chloe didn't beg. She knew better now. Even the tears felt more like panic than remorse. As Agnes stepped out the front door, she paused on the porch, her porch, and looked out at the small crowd that had gathered across the street. Neighbors, reporters, curious passers-by. Some clapped. Some just stared. Agnes gave no speech. She simply walked down the steps past the tulips into the waiting car. Elizabeth held the door open for her. Inside, Rachel was already typing the follow-up article. As they drove off, Agnes took one last look in the rearview mirror. The house shrank behind her, but it didn't vanish. No, it stood there still, drenched in sunlight. Still looking like the perfect picture Chloe had painted. But now the world knew perfection was a lie. And sometimes all you have to do to expose a lie is shine a quiet light on it. They had 30 days. That was the order stamped in red on the eviction notice. 30 days to vacate the premises. No appeals, no discussions. Final ruling. The courtroom had been painfully quiet when the judge handed it down. Chloe had tried to plead, her voice cracking under the weight of desperation. She wore a navy blazer 2 sizes too big and makeup that couldn't hide the dark rings under her eyes. Ethan sat beside her, silent, unmoving, like he'd already accepted what was coming before they even stepped into the building. Agnes didn't look at them. She didn't need to look at them. Because the court had spoken, and with it, the house finally belonged to its rightful owner again. The ruling was airtight. Agnes Monroe was the sole legal owner of the property. The documents Chloe and Ethan submitted to the bank were falsified. Chloe's attempt to mortgage the home without consent qualified as financial fraud. Ethan's signature on the transfer papers implicated him as a willing accomplice. No jail time, not yet, but heavy fines, community service, and a permanent mark on their records. And a single demand from Agnes's legal team: vacate the house within the month. The news spread fast. Chloe was called into the office the next morning. The HR rep didn't even pretend to be gentle. "Given the severity of the public backlash and your ethical violations," she said, sliding an envelope across the desk, "we're terminating your contract effective immediately. Security will escort you out." Chloe didn't cry. She just sat there, hollowed out, nodding once before gathering her things. There wasn't much, just a plant, a broken charger, and a framed photo of her and Ethan in front of the house. The house that was never theirs. By week 3, they were packing what little they had. No more catered brunches. No more photo shoots in the living room with perfectly arranged cheese boards and forced laughter. The house had grown cold, not from lack of heat, but from absence of control. Agnes, through her lawyer, had already replaced the locks. The new security system pinged every movement, every door. They weren't welcome anymore. One afternoon, Chloe came downstairs to find Ethan staring at the walls. There were boxes at their feet, half packed. She's going to throw it all away, Chloe whispered. Everything we built. Ethan didn't respond. He just picked up the box labeled books, office, and said without looking at her, "We didn't build anything. We stole." It was raining the morning they left. Not a dramatic downpour, just a cold, relentless drizzle that soaked through clothes and left everything feeling heavier. Chloe had curled her hair, applied one last coat of lipstick, and thrown on a beige trench coat she'd once described as effortlessly upper middle class. But the effect was lost now. Her makeup was streaked before they reached the curb. Ethan carried the bags, 2 suitcases, 1 backpack, a box taped shut in a hurry, the corner already splitting. No truck, no farewell party, just the squeak of wheels dragging across wet concrete and the silence of a neighborhood watching from behind half-closed blinds. Inside a black sedan parked across the street, Agnes sat still. She wasn't hiding. She was observing. Elizabeth sat beside her, hands folded neatly on her lap, saying nothing. They didn't need to speak. The moment spoke for itself. 3 years ago, Agnes had stood on that same porch, alone, with 2 suitcases. Her coat wasn't beige and new. It had been her late husband's old field jacket, 2 sizes too large. She had left without a voice, without defense, barely able to hold her breath long enough to walk away from the betrayal. But this wasn't walking away. This was watching the thieves be asked to return what they took. As Chloe descended the front steps, she glanced around, looking for someone. Maybe for sympathy, maybe for a witness to this unfairness. She saw Agnes through the window. Their eyes met for a second too long. Chloe froze, but Agnes didn't flinch. Her gaze wasn't angry or triumphant. It was calm, still. And somehow that unnerved Chloe more than rage ever could, because there was no invitation in those eyes, no redemption offered, no seat at the table, just a closed door. Ethan paused at the mailbox. He pulled out one final envelope, a plain white one addressed to him in Agnes's handwriting. He opened it there on the sidewalk. Inside was a check. Uncashed. Unused. It was the original inheritance Frank had left for him, the one Chloe had tried to redirect years ago. At the bottom, written in Agnes's looping cursive, were 5 words. "This is your last mercy." He said nothing, just folded the paper, tucked it back in, and slipped it into his coat. When the Uber pulled away, Agnes exhaled slowly, fogging the window. Then, without a word, she stepped out of the car and crossed the street, every step deliberate, grounded, unshaken. The moment her key clicked into the new lock, the one she had installed herself, it was as if the house exhaled too. And as the door swung open, Agnes stepped inside her home, not as a guest, not as someone tolerated, but as the woman who had survived it all, and finally returned. The house was quiet, not the empty kind of quiet, not like the nights she had spent lying awake listening to muffled arguments or the echo of her own breath through unfamiliar walls. No, this quiet was clean, restorative, like the stillness of a lake at dawn right before the sun decides it's safe to rise again. Agnes stood just inside the doorway, letting her eyes adjust. The place had changed, of course. Chloe's obsession with modern minimalism had stripped it of color, of texture. The once warm living room now stood sterile, full of beige throw pillows and pointless decor signs that read things like, "Home is where the Wi-Fi connects automatically." Agnes smiled faintly. She toed off her shoes at the threshold and stepped onto the hardwood. Her fingers brushed along the wall where Frank once installed a wooden shelf for their wedding photos. It had been taken down. She would rebuild it. In the kitchen, she opened a cabinet still filled with overpriced glassware and untouched cookbooks. She took one down, blew the dust off, and placed it in a donation box she'd brought with her. In the next hour, she moved from room to room like someone returning from a long trip, not just to unpack, but to reclaim. A quiet ceremony, no fanfare. She found her old sewing machine shoved into the back of a closet behind a stack of Chloe's shoes. She pulled it out, dusted it off, and set it by the window where it used to sit when she'd make quilts for the neighbors' babies. In the garage, tucked under a dusty tarp, was Frank's old fishing gear. She sat beside it for a while, running her hand along the weathered leather of the tackle box. There was a photo still inside Frank and Ethan smiling on the dock, Agnes standing behind them blurry and barefoot. She tucked it into her cardigan pocket, close to her heart. As the afternoon sun slanted low, Agnes brewed tea. Not fancy tea from an influencer brand, just the kind she always liked. Loose chamomile steeped strong, no sugar. She carried it out to the back porch where the wooden swing still creaked just a little too much. She didn't fix it. That creak was memory. And there, with steam curling around her face and light dappling the garden path, Agnes allowed herself something she hadn't felt in years. Rest. Not just comfort. Not just safety. But the kind of rest that comes when you've fought for your place in the world, lost it, and clawed it back on your own terms. From the porch, she could still see the faint marks on the driveway where Ethan and Chloe's car used to park. They were fading now. So were the voices that blamed the nights of silence and swallowed pain. Agnes took another sip of tea. Then she looked toward the front gate where a small white sign had just been installed. The ink was still fresh. Private property. No trespassing. And just below it, in smaller type, welcome only if you're kind. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need recognition. She had a home again. And this time, no one would ever take it from her. The house sat empty yet alive. In the weeks following her return, Agnes made a decision, one that surprised even her closest allies. She would not live there. Not because she couldn't, but because she had outgrown it. The walls had witnessed too much. Too many silences weaponized. Too many footsteps she had to tiptoe. And so she called the nonprofit, Elder Safe. They were called a quiet organization, tucked between headlines and overlooked grant applications. They specialized in advocacy for seniors facing abuse, financial exploitation, abandonment. People like her. People like the ones no one listened to. Agnes didn't just write them a check. She handed them keys. The house. Her house would become a shelter for women aged 50 and above, evicted by their own families, left in hospital waiting rooms, or manipulated out of their savings. There would be warmth. There would be counseling. There would be doors that locked from the inside. It won't fix everything, she told the director as she passed over the deed. But maybe it'll keep another woman from having to sit on a curb with 2 suitcases and nowhere to go. The press picked it up. An op-ed in the Seattle Weekly called it one of the quietest revolutions of the year. And yet Agnes refused every interview. Chloe and Ethan were ghosts now. Not in the supernatural sense, no. They still lived just across town in a 2-bedroom rental with thin walls and a leaking faucet. But socially, they had vanished. Their friends stopped calling. The yoga moms, the brunch circles, the real estate agents who used to compliment Chloe's outfits, they all moved on. People who build their lives on pretense don't do well with scandal. Chloe tried to restart her online business, rebrand herself as an elder care advocate, but screenshots of her voice that recorded clip of "She won't live long. The house will be ours soon" had never stopped circulating. No one trusted her now. Ethan worked at a warehouse. Night shifts, minimum wage, no benefits. His degree didn't matter. His last name came up in too many articles. His silence had cost him more than he ever imagined. But none of that prepared him for what he saw the day he knocked on Agnes's new front door. Because Agnes, seated at a small table near a sun-drenched window dressed in linen, her hair pulled back simply, was glowing in a way he hadn't seen in years. And she wasn't alone. The room was filled with light. A pot of tea was already steaming. 2 cups. A journal half open beside her. There was no pity in her eyes when she looked up. Only age. And memory. And something dangerously close to peace. "Come in," she said. No anger, no warmth. Just a seat pulled out gently without expectation. Ethan sat down. He looked thinner, older, like life had finally caught up to the version of him he had been pretending not to be. "I've been ashamed," he began, his voice scratchy. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to see you, to say, I know what I lost." Agnes poured tea. Her hands didn't tremble. She didn't interrupt. She waited. Then, after a long silence, she reached into a drawer and handed him a single piece of paper. It was the updated will. Clean, simple. His name was no longer there. But at the bottom, a handwritten note in Agnes's careful cursive. This legacy was never about money. You were written out of it. But that doesn't mean you have to live without meaning. You can still choose who you become. Ethan held the paper with both hands. He didn't cry. He just nodded like someone finally hearing the answer to a question they'd spent their life trying to avoid. He left quietly. And behind him, Agnes watched the door close with finality. Not cruelty. Just clarity. The door clicked shut with a soft finality. Agnes didn't watch Ethan walk away. She didn't need to. She had already seen everything she needed in his face, the recognition of a man who finally understood the weight of his choices. There was no need for grand speeches, no tears. Sometimes the loudest apology is silence itself. She returned to her chair. The steam from her tea had thinned, curling into the air like a ribbon losing its form. She didn't mind. The flavor was always stronger after sitting a while, like truth, she thought. Outside, the early spring air carried a breeze soft and fragrant, with the first hints of cherry blossom. A blue jay landed on the railing of her modest porch, its feathers bright against the aging wood. Agnes picked up her journal. Today's page was blank. Not because she had nothing to say, but because for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like writing to prove anything. Her story had already been written. Now, she was simply living the afterword. She looked around her new home. It was small, intentionally so. 2 bedrooms, one for her, one for guests. No marble countertops, no open concept, no statement chandeliers, just things that mattered. On the bookshelf sat photographs that had once been buried in storage her wedding day with Frank Ethan at 6A, smiling neighbor from Ohio, who used to bring over lemon bars every Sunday. They were crooked in their frames. She had never quite learned how to hang them evenly, but somehow that made them feel more hers. In the corner, a record player hummed a vinyl tune from the 60s. Sam Cooke, maybe. Or Dusty Springfield. She didn't always know the names, but she knew the feeling, soft, grainy, rich, with lived memory. And beside the window, a potted plant was thriving. She didn't even remember buying it. It had been a gift from one of the women at the Elder Safe Center. For new roots, the note had said. Agnes touched one of its leaves, then exhaled. It was strange, she thought, how many years she had spent trying to stay quiet, to stay agreeable, to stay needed. And in the end, it wasn't her anger that gave her power. It was her clarity. She had said no. She had walked away. She had taken back the keys to her name, her body, her narrative, and then given them to others who needed them more. That was enough. She didn't need Ethan to come back and rebuild their bond. She didn't need Chloe to understand what she destroyed. She didn't need to be remembered as a good mother or a wise woman or even a victim-turned-hero. She just needed to be. And so she was. That evening, Agnes sat on her porch as the sun began to fall. The sky over Washington bled soft orange into violet, the clouds cotton thin, floating like memories that didn't hurt anymore. A soft wind stirred the chimes above her doorway, low notes almost like a lullaby. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and reached for her tea again, now cold but comforting in its way. Her bones ached a little, a reminder that time had passed, that life had demanded much, that survival always carried a cost. But tonight she didn't feel heavy. She felt light. The kind of lightness that only comes after you've carried what nearly broke you and then set it down finally without asking permission. Her eyes drifted to the front gate. It stood closed. And for the first time in years, that didn't feel like exclusion. It felt like protection. Inside the house, a lamp flickered on by itself. one of those smart bulbs the ElderSafe team had installed. She had laughed at first, saying she didn't need gadgets, but now she liked the gentle glow that met her as the sky darkened. She picked up a small wooden frame from the side table. It was a photo from decades ago, one of the only ones she still kept in the open. Frank was holding a young Ethan on his shoulders, both of them laughing, completely unaware of the camera. Agnes stood beside them, her eyes focused not on the lens but on them. Always on them. She touched the edge of the frame, then set it down. Inside, the kettle began to whistle. She didn't rush to it. Let it sing a little. Let it feel needed. Then footsteps. Not on the porch, not in the yard. Just one set from within her memory, soft and steady, as if Frank himself was walking the hallway one last time. She didn't look. She didn't need to. Instead, she stood, stretched slowly, and walked back inside. She passed the dining table where a second chair remained empty, but never lonely. She poured a fresh cup of tea, placed it across from hers, and sat down again. The steam curled. The silence was full. And that was her last hug. Not a person, not a word, but a moment whole sacred and entirely her own. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of strength, of silence, of second chances, then don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with someone who needs to remember their worth. And if you have a story, even just a whisper of one, drop it in the comments. Thank you.